expecting our first baby here pretty soon, here in about 6 months. Up until I was, I think, 13, I lived in Searcy, Arkansas. And then after we moved from there, we moved up here to the Ash Flat area, which is pretty close to Hardy, Arkansas, if you know where that is. It's not too far from the Missouri border. Searcy, where I used to live, it's maybe an hour drive north of Little Rock. The area in Searcy was quite a bit different from the area up here where I live now. Up here, there's a lot of mountains, and it's a real rocky area, but Searcy was much flatter and more of a swampy type terrain. Other than that, I don't really know a whole lot else of any significance to tell you about myself.
When you were living in the Searcy area, did any of your family members ever have any encounters with dogmen? If they did, please don't share the particulars of those encounters with us yet, but just curious to find out if any of them did.
Well, years later, it's actually fairly recently, in the past few years, I've learned that my grandparents had, I wouldn't really call them encounters, but they know of just some strange things that happen around where they live, because they lived just down the road from where we did at the time.
That type of area would be a very good area for a dogman to hide out, so I'm not surprised you did have activity like you did, like the listeners are going to hear about tonight. You mentioned that Searcy is kind of a swampy area. Not having been down there to know, is there a heavy deer population down there? What kind of food resources would a dogman or maybe even a Sasquatch have access to?
There was quite a bit of game. There was a lot of turkey and a lot of deer. Actually, the area where we lived, about maybe a quarter mile behind our property, there is a bayou called the Desert Bayou that ran through. It had a lot of fish in it and an ungodly amount of snakes everywhere, just water moccasins. If you were ever walking through there, you had to be careful because during certain parts of the year, those snakes were everywhere, very thick. You wouldn't necessarily see the wildlife a whole lot unless you were out looking for them, but there was a pretty thick population of all kinds of things.
Yeah, in areas like that, I can't see there being any problem feeding something even as large as a dogman, so that's not all that surprising. Without telling us the particulars of your first encounter yet, how old were you when you had that first encounter?
I was about 12.
Right around 12. Back then, were you into Bigfoot and other cryptids like that?
Not really. The most I'd ever heard about something like a Bigfoot was my dad would tell me when he was younger, when he was in his 20s, he worked around the Texarkana area. And, that's where they have the Boggy Creek monster that, they had that documentary about. He worked in a forest tower, I believe it was, and his job was to watch out for forest fires. And so he kind of lived up in the tower by himself most of the time. And he would tell me about stories that he had heard from other people about there being, some kind of strange creature that lived around there. But other than him mentioning that to me, I didn't really think about it a whole lot at the time.
Yeah, having a job like that, I can only imagine what kind of access he'd have to stories like that. The Boggy Creek incidents had been going on for some time before you were even born. By the time you were 12, I'm sure that the area had quite a bit of activity still, so I'm not surprised to hear that he might have heard stories about things like that going on in that area.
Mm-hmm. What he was telling me about, the experiences he was telling me about, was maybe 20 years before I was even born. Well, maybe not 20, but maybe like 10 or 15 years before I even came along. It was when he was a younger man.
Yeah, that sounds right as far as timing goes. Well, Jake, let's jump right into this first encounter that you had. You said you were around 12-ish or so. What led you to be in the location where you had that encounter?
Well, you mentioned before we lived at the end of a dead-end road. It was a gravel road. The road just kind of stopped and gradually turned into somewhat of like a four-wheeler trail, and that was basically what it was. On the right side of the road, there was a forested area, maybe, 80 acres. 90 acres, something like that, of forest. And then there was another 80 acres of field on the other side of that. On almost all sides of that forest, there was some kind of crop field. I think it was mostly soybean that they had through there. I was walking down this wood line that was next to this particular patch of forest, strolling down the trail there. I've always been kind of an outdoorsy person. I just like wandering around out there. I think at that particular time I was looking for arrowhead maybe, because I remember I found one time, and so that kind of got me in gear to want to go out and look around more just to see what I could get into. I was walking down the trail after it had turned into the four-wheeler trail. I kind of just wasn't paying attention to anything really, just kind of bebopping down there. And I hear a loud commotion coming from inside the forested area. It was off in a distance when I first heard it, but I heard that it was coming closer towards my direction. These two white-tailed deer, they were does, just kind of bursted out of the wood line and took off across the field. They were really booking it, and they didn't pay me any attention. I was maybe 20 yards, something like that, away from them. So they just took off across the road in front of me and took off across the field, because after you got across the field, you would get back to another forested area, which was really thick, and it was unbroken for a long time. So they were taking off towards there, and maybe 3 or 4 seconds behind them, this really humongous dog came running out on all fours. At the time, I didn't think a whole lot of it, other than that it was just really, really big. It was just a really huge dog. And with us having a German Shepherd kennel at the time, I was familiar with how big they were, and this dog was a lot bigger than them. It was even bigger than the deer were. I don't know if you've ever got to stand next to a white-tailed deer, but they'll come up to about your belt line where their back is. It was quite a bit taller than even they were, so it was a huge dog. It was a little bit misshapen. It looked like its front legs were a little longer than they should have been, and that put a little bit of a slope to its back, almost like a hyena, but maybe not that extreme of a slope, but it was a little bit. But other than that, I didn't think a whole lot of it. And after I saw that run out of the woods chasing a deer, it really didn't pay me any attention at all. It never looked at me or broke its stride or anything. As it was taking off across the field after them, I kind of just decided to go ahead and head on back to the house and just call it a day for then.
I can't say I blame you. You mentioned that this hyena-looking dog had front legs that were longer than its back legs. Was its running style ungainly in nature, or did it look pretty fluid?
No, it looked very smooth. To me, it looked like just the way a normal dog would run. Just reaching out a little bit further with its front legs than normal, because it had a little bit more of a stride, but other than that, it seemed pretty normal. At the time, I just assumed that maybe one of the farmers that lived down the road bought some humongous exotic dog or something, and it was out running around.
That had to be quite the sight to see. As it's going after those deer, did you hear it make any sounds?
No, I didn't hear the dog-looking creature make any sound. Earlier, when the deers were coming through the woods, I heard them kind of let out that little sound that they make. If something startles them, they'll do that sound. I heard that, but at the time I didn't know what a deer really sounded like, so I didn't know what that was until they came out of the woods. But as far as the dog-looking thing, no, I never heard it making a sound.
What can you tell us about its appearance as far as the coat goes?
The coat was pretty average looking. It was a little bit longer than our German Shepherds would be. It was a little bit more shaggy, but it was proportioned out really similar. It didn't have a really big mane to it or anything, but it had a little bit thicker hair across its back. Portions of it was more brownish, and then it had more darker portions to it. It was broken up between brown and black and just a little bit here and there. But it didn't look really ghoulish or anything. It just looked like a normal, well-put-together animal.
You said it looked like a dog with unusually long front legs. I take it its back legs were canine in structure, or were they more man-like in structure?
No, they just looked like a regular dog's legs, other than them being very big. I remember that this creature, it had very muscular back legs too, but with something that size, you would just assume that it would. I honestly didn't think there was anything too extremely unusual about that at the time, other than its size and it being a little bit misshapen.
You know how it is, sometimes when you see something that would normally be scary, for whatever reason, you're not scared at that moment. Blame it on shock, it's hard to say, but when you saw this going on, since its attention was focused on the deer, did a bolt of fear run right down your spine, or were you pretty much just a spectator at the moment?
I kind of felt like I was a spectator. I mean, it did surprise me a little bit when it came tearing out of the woods after him, because I just wasn't expecting to see anything like that. I wasn't even thinking that there was anything chasing them. I thought maybe they had just heard me walking and that's what made them take off. But no, there was something going after him, and from the way he was running, he was gaining on them, and I'm pretty sure he got at least one of them after they got back into the woods. But like I said before, I wasn't going to necessarily stick around and see what happened after.
Yeah, I don't think anyone could blame you. If you consider the fact that white-tailed deer allegedly top out at around 35 miles an hour, for it to gain on them the way you said you saw it doing, that's a very unnerving thought.
If it wanted to change its attention to come after me, it would have had me in maybe 3 or 4 seconds. It would have caught up to me. I would have never been able to make it back to the house without it getting on me.
Oh, I'd say, after seeing something like that, you knew at the moment that it would never be the same. I'm sure of that.
Yeah, it was concerning even then.
Yeah, I'd say so. Please tell us about this second encounter you had.
I want to say that this was a few weeks later. It could have been a month later. I'm not real sure on my timeline, but our family were very much nighttime people because we've all worked night shift pretty much our entire life. We would do like floor cleaning jobs kind of all over the state, and we're just always used to being up at night all the time. So it was around midnight maybe, give or take a little bit. My mother had asked me to run the trash out. So after I was done procrastinating, doing everything but that, I finally went ahead and grabbed a couple bags of trash and started walking it out to the fence. The trash cans were just on the other side of the fence. It was about a 5-foot chain link fence where we kept all of our dogs. I could have just thrown the bags over the fence, but for whatever reason, I always just opened the gate and went outside and shut the gate behind me. So I go outside the fence and I'm lugging the trash bags into the cans just down the fence line from me, because this portion of the fence line ran parallel to the gravel road, and on the other side of the gravel road was the wood line. If you went down to the end of the fence and turned where the fence turned, it went into a pine tree grove. Like I said, I was lugging the trash into the can, and I hear something kind of push off of the gravel. Because, you know, the gravel's really audible. You can't walk on it and not make a crunching noise. I hear something really violently push off of the gravel and tear off through the pine trees again. In my head, because I didn't see what did it, I had a flashlight with me, but it was just a real cheap little $3 flashlight. You know, it wasn't like a spotlight. You couldn't really see anything with it. In my head, I'm thinking some of the dogs may have gotten out of the fence or something. It wasn't uncommon for them. We'd have 15 or so dogs in the yard at a time, and it wasn't really uncommon for them to get out of the fence, either by climbing onto something and jumping over, or either digging under and getting out. It wasn't uncommon for them to get out of the fence and run around, just to be difficult. So me assuming that it was just one of the dogs, I take off running over there towards it. I get around the corner of the fence and I turn the corner. I've got the light in front of me and I can hear something moving away from me. As I'm moving towards it and it's moving away from me, I'm close enough to the outside of the fence where I can reach over and touch it. I'm just right there next to it. I'm going through the woods a little bit because this portion of the fence was right up against the pine trees. I am going through there. 2 of the dogs are in front of me inside the fence, really going nuts, barking at whatever is in front of me. I just assumed that it was just another one of the dogs. As I'm following it down the fence line, getting a little bit deeper into the pine grove, I get parallel with where our house is, where I can shine the light inside the fence and see where the house is. So I do that, and I see that all but 2 of our dogs are under the house. I can clearly see them, you know, they're all there. The house wasn't too far from where I was. And I counted them, and they were all just kind of huddled under there. So that let me know that whatever I was going toward wasn't what I thought it was. It wasn't one of the dogs. I had a little bit of a panic feeling, thinking, oh my God, I could have been chasing anything back here, who knows? minutes, and I go back in the house for a little bit. At this point, I'm somewhat curious as to what it was, because it was uncommon for these dogs to get that scared of anything, especially out there. There's not really bear or anything like that. So I go back out maybe 30 minutes later, and I've got my little weak flashlight again. Our alpha dog, Braun, he was kind of the leader of the pack, I guess you could say. He was the daddy dog of everybody. He was kind of staying in one particular area, and it was pretty close to where I was standing before when I shined the light and noticed that the dogs were near the house. So I start making my way over towards him, and I shine the light on him, and he's just going berserk, just really flipping out. He's barking and growling, and he's got like a real viciousness to his barks. So I shine the light over to him, and then I look at what he's barking at that's just on the other side of the fence, and it's another dog, but it's humongous. All I could really see was the head, because there was a little bit of vegetation at this particular spot. There's this humongous gray-looking dog. It's pressing his head up against the fence, and he's actually bowing in the chain link fence. You know, he's pressing that hard. Our big dog, Braun, he was just 130, 150-pound German Shepherd. You know, he's a huge dog. He's just going berserk, and he hates that this thing is touching his fence, and he's very territorial. And so he's biting at its head, and he's swiping at it. But this thing is looking past Braun, and he's looking at the dogs that are still under the house. It was almost like he was trying to somewhat intimidate them into staying under the house. And he wasn't really paying attention to Braun, even though he was swiping at his head and everything. There was just a thin layer of chain link fence in between them. I remember this thing's head was 3 or 4 times bigger than Braun, and he was a huge dog for a German Shepherd. After I shined the light on it, it kind of ignored me a little bit. It didn't pay any attention to me. After I shined the light on it, I watched it for maybe 5 or 10 seconds. It kind of sprung back and took off through the woods again, and it was gone. So that was something that kind of aroused my curiosity a little bit. I was wondering how there could be a dog that big and why it would be looking at our other dogs that way. You know, he was looking at them like they were a Little Debbie snack or something. You know, he just didn't have any regard for them. So I go back in the house again. At this point, I'm kind of freaking out a little bit. I don't say anything to anybody. It was just my mom and my younger brother, who was, I think he was like 3 at the time. They were inside the house. I think she was either giving him a bath or getting ready to put him to bed or something. So I just stay in the house for a few minutes. The more I sit in the house, the more curious I get. The more I'm thinking, but there's really a dog that big. I've got to go try to take a look at it again. I got to see what it's doing, you know, if it's trying to get in the yard to eat the dog food or whatever. I didn't have any idea. So I come back outside maybe an hour after that, after I kind of get myself together a little bit. And I've still got this cheap flashlight, but now Braun has turned his attention to the portion of the fence that the trash cans were up against. This is the part of the fence where just on the other side of the fence there's a gravel road, and then immediately where the road stops, the forest starts. He's got his attention up on that part of the fence, and again, he's just going berserk with a really vicious bark. I remember that made an impression on me at the time, because I had never heard him be that vicious in the way that his bark sounded. And, you know, he was growling and, you know, foaming, and he was just going nuts. So I walk halfway across the yard, and I'm looking at him, and I start shining the flashlight in the direction that he's barking, and I don't see anything at all. So I walk pretty much all the way up to him. I'm giving him a little bit of distance because he's going berserk, and I don't want him to freak out and turn around and knock me over or something. But I just keep shining the light over there, and I'm talking to him. I'm trying to get him calmed down. But he obviously knew that there was something there, and I just didn't see it. I'm swiping the light across the wood line, and I don't see anything. And then all of a sudden, boom, just right there, right in front of where I was standing. It must have been on all fours behind some bushes, but I shined the light on it again, and it was just standing there. It was just standing there, and it was looking directly at me. He was ignoring Braun. He was just looking at me. And place. And I could see it from about the waist up. Like I said, he was standing on the other side of some bushes, but it wasn't but maybe 10 yards away from me. It was just however much distance, a one-lane gravel road. That's how far away. He was just standing there just staring at me, and he had his head tilted down a little bit. I mean, he was almost looking, you know, like how someone would like look over a pair of glasses, you know, that have their head tilted. That's how he was looking. And he had really pointy ears that stood up just like a German Shepherd. And he was gray all over. He wasn't super massive and muscular, but he looked well built. The word that I would use to describe the way it looked is just, it looked quick. It looked like it could be super fast and agile. When the light hit it, and it was standing there, Braun kind of turned his attention towards me, and he starts jumping on the fence where he's hitting the fence, and then he would hit the ground and bounce back up and hit my chest. It was clear that, you know, the dog was trying to communicate to me that he wanted me to leave. He was trying to push me back into the house. And this thing, it didn't hardly move. It just blinked one or two times, and I could see its ears kind of twitching a little bit, but it was just giving me a really cold stare. It wasn't snarling or anything like that, just a really cold stare. It was like the only reason that it stood up was just so I could see it. That was really disturbing to me, and Braun kept trying to push me back in the house, and at one point he almost knocked me on the ground completely, but he would never turn his attention away from this thing for very long at a time. I shined the light on it as much as I could, even with the dog trying to wrestle me back inside. I didn't say anything. I didn't make any noises. It was just really disturbing. And it eventually kind of popped back down, and I could hear it run off again. I didn't see it again. I never saw it really clearly, as clear as I did then. I never saw it like that again. But that was the time that I got a confirmation that it was more than just a big dog.
When it ran off, did it run off on all fours or two legs?
All I saw is I saw it dip back down really fast behind the bushes that it popped up from, and then I could hear it run off. But I couldn't hear it well enough to know the stride, because our big dog Braun, he was still freaking out and going nuts. So he was kind of drowning out anything else.
As you're looking back and forth through the woods with that flashlight, and all of a sudden, boom, there it is, you see it. Did you see motion as it was standing up, or when you hit it with the beam, was it already standing up on two legs?
When I hit it with the beam, it was already up. It was very dark, and the flashlight that I had was too cheap to really illuminate too big of an area, so I swept it over this area one time, and then I swept it back again maybe 2 seconds later, and it was there where it wasn't before. It's like it was watching me from like a lower position in the bushes, and then decided that it wanted me to see that it was there. But I never saw it stand up. Whatever it did it very smooth and didn't make any noise.
Did this second dogman look anything like that first dogman you saw that day chasing the deer?
I didn't really think about this at the time. I assumed it was the same one, but this one, its colors were different. This one was mostly gray. The one that I saw before didn't have much gray on it at all. It was more tan and black, or maybe like a brownish and black, and it was broken up more. But this one was just one solid color. It was just gray.
At this point in your life, you have had 2 encounters with dogmen. Had anything strange been going on in the area before you had those 2 encounters to maybe let you know that something was going on, something strange was in the area?
Before then, no, not at all. At that age, whenever I did go out in the woods or when I did go walk around, I was not paying attention to anything. I was just kind of looking at the ground, looking for arrowheads, or just looking to see what I could get into. But no, I'd never noticed anything else before then.
I can't believe you had the nerve to go back out there after experiencing what you had experienced just about an hour before. You had some brass.
Well, I didn't really get the full scope of it until I saw it standing upright. And then I realized it was something more than just some big dog that was messing with our dogs.
Yeah, that would leave an impression on you. I don't care who you are. You mentioned your mother and your younger brother were inside the house. I'm foggy on whether you did or didn't mention this activity to your mother.
When I went inside the first time after it was on all fours, I'm pretty sure it was, when I could just see the head and it was pressing up against the fence, I went inside and said that it looked like there was a really big dog outside the fence messing with our other dogs. And that's pretty much all I said. Of course, you don't really think much of that. I don't remember what she said, but it wasn't anything real significant or nothing. She mentioned that she was going to tell my dad when he got home from work, and he would go out and look for it and see if there was anything that he needed to do.
Well, it's a good thing your dad was so open-minded.
Well, I actually didn't mention the time that I saw it standing up. When I went back in the house after that, I did not mention that to anybody for years. I didn't say a word. I couldn't really find a way to say it without me looking really crazy or something. And even to myself, I wondered if I could have actually seen that. It was there standing in front of me, but I just couldn't bring myself to fully believe that I saw what I did for quite a while after that.
From what I understand, that wasn't your last experience with one of these things. What happened after that incident?
Well, after that happened, I didn't go back outside for a good little bit, maybe a few weeks or a month or something, but my curiosity did eventually kind of get the better of me, and I just had to know. I had to know if I could see it again, or what it was, or if I saw something wrong, or what. Now, I couldn't justify in my head that it was a bear, or that it was anything else, but I just had to know more. So I started going outside at night. This time I stayed inside the fence. We had like an acre and a half that was fenced in, because we had all the dogs and they needed room to run around and get exercise. So we had a pretty big fenced in area. But part of the fence on the northeast side of the fence, I mentioned there were pine groves around portions of the fence. In the northeast corner of the fence, part of the pine grove was actually fenced in into being part of the yard. So it was almost like there was a small wooded area inside the fence. So I go out one night, and I went out every night for a while, as much as I could get away with. And like I said, I was used to being up all night anyway, because I was homeschooled, so I didn't have to worry about getting up early and doing anything. I could just kind of do my work at my own pace as long as I got it done. So I would stay up all night and just sit out there and listen and wait to see what would happen. One particular night, this time all the dogs were out. It wasn't just Braun. All of the dogs were out in the yard, and they were really going nuts in the corner of the yard where these trees were inside the fence. Of course, on the other side of the fence, the grove continued for a couple acres, and then it turned back into natural forest again, because this pine grove, it was something that was man-made. It was something that somebody planted, so the trees were in rows really close to each other, but they were mature trees. Some of them were just big enough to hug, and that's about it. Maybe like a couple of feet around. But all of the dogs, there was over a dozen of them, they were all in this area, and they were all just going berserk, which I thought was strange because it was kind of rare, especially when you have the one alpha dog, Braun. You didn't really see him and the other male dogs around each other very often. They did not get along. German Shepherds are very similar-minded to how a wolf pack is, so you just didn't have that type of dynamic. So I was surprised to see that they were all over there together, all focusing in on one particular thing and just really going nuts and having the real vicious barks. I kind of make my way over there to where they are, and again, this is at night. This time I didn't have a flashlight with me. I don't know why not. Maybe I couldn't find it, or I didn't have fresh batteries for it or something. I don't remember. I make my way over there to where that little grove is inside the fence where the dogs were. They had been going nuts for maybe an hour, just nonstop, making all kinds of racket. I stand maybe 10 feet behind them as they're jumping on the fence and really getting after it. All of a sudden, all of the dogs just stopped. They just went from, really chaotic sounding to just nothing. And they were really quiet, and they were all watching. They all had their ears up, and the hair on their back was standing up, and they were really tense, and they were just all watching toward this one direction. and then I hear something. At first, it was in the distance. I could hear really rapid steps, and they sounded like it was something on two legs. It didn't sound like a four-legged stride, but it was just a really rapid two-legged stride. When something's coming at you, even when you don't see it, you can tell that it's coming towards you rather than away from you, because the sound gets louder. And this was coming towards the fence, towards where I was. And it's getting closer and closer. At the time, it felt like I could hear it for a long time, but it was probably just maybe 3 seconds or something. After I hear the steps and this thing tearing off towards the fence, the dogs just explode again, and this time they all jump up on the fence at the same time. They're all up on two legs, and they've got their front paws on the fence, and they're just as loud as they can and trying to sound as aggressive as they could. You got 12 German Shepherds making a bunch of noise. I hear it stop. I couldn't hear it very well anymore because of the dogs, but I could hear it come to a stop, and I could hear it slide. Like it stopped itself really quickly, and it was not far from where the fence was. It sounded like it was maybe 15 yards from the fence, which with this pine grove, you could hear something making steps because the pine needles on the ground were really thick, and you could hear it come to a slide, and it stopped. Then I heard something making its way up a tree. It's almost like you could hear claws, and you could hear that real soft pine tree bark getting ripped into, and you could hear something making its way up a tree really fast. And then you hear it go from that tree to another tree, which these trees were only a couple of feet apart. It wouldn't have been that difficult for it to do it. You hear it transition from tree to tree in like a staggered pattern, and it's getting closer. And at this point, I'm kind of taking a few steps back. I could hear something moving from the trees over the sound of the dogs barking, but I couldn't make out really where it was. It was really dark that night. It wasn't particularly well lit with a moon or anything. I noticed that the dogs turned their attention from the other side of the fence to now they're barking up a tree that's inside the fence. So evidently whatever it was had made its way from tree to tree until it had arranged itself where it was on the side of the fence that I was on. It was inside the fence with us now. I could hear it over the sound of the dogs. It would make these really deep growling noises. It wasn't really loud. It was just, it's hard to describe, just a really bassy, low growl. The dogs were all huddled up around this one particular tree. I'm assuming that's where it was, and that's where the noise was coming from, is that one. But it never came down the tree, and I never got a good look at it. As it transitioned back to another tree a few minutes later, and it never came down, I could see it transition to another tree in the same pattern that it came in. I didn't get a good enough look at it to really make out like a shape. I could just see a really dark figure going back from tree to tree. And then when it got across the fence a little ways, I could hear it hit the ground. Boom. And then you could hear those same steps, except they were going in the opposite direction now. They were going back off towards the bayou and towards where the woods got really thick again. After that night, I stopped going back outside at night for a while, because I knew that whatever it was trying to get inside the fence for some reason. I don't know that it was scared of the dogs, because from whatever I saw before standing up, I knew that it was big enough to take a few of the dogs, but I'm not sure that it was confident enough to drop itself down in the middle of a dozen. It's hard to explain, but for whatever reason, it never came in the yard that I know of, but I know that it wanted to. After it jumped down out of the tree again, and I heard it hit the ground, and I heard it run off, that was the last time that I had really seen or heard anything really substantial after that.
Did you tell any of your family members about this incident?
I did tell them, but it was years before I mentioned it. We were listening to another talk show where they talk about different things like that, with us being out at night all the time. We were listening to, I think it was Coast to Coast, and someone that lived in an area that wasn't very far from where we lived called in. This woman also had a dog kennel. I can't remember what she had. I think maybe, if I remember right, she had maybe Dobermans. But she had a kennel of Dobermans, I think they were, she described the exact same thing as what it was doing with our dogs. It would walk the fence line, and it would harass her dogs, and it would try to intimidate them into backing off. And one night she had a flashlight, and she did see it standing up. After I heard someone say that, and just the way that she described it in the show, it was almost as if she was standing there next to me and saw the same exact thing I did. After I heard that, a couple of days later, I did mention it to my dad that I did see something that looked like a dog that was standing up, and it was, really gigantic, and it was trying to intimidate the other dogs, just like how this other person was describing. But before then, I didn't even know where to start to try to tell somebody. It just sounds so bizarre and so weird, you just don't know how to bring it up. But after I had heard that at least one other person had seen something like that, I felt comfortable enough to tell my dad.
When you're sitting there in the truck with your dad listening to Coast, as this woman's talking about this encounter that she's had that's so similar to the one that you had, I'm sure you're sitting there watching your dad trying to decide if you're going to share the details of the encounter, or I should say encounters you had at that point with him. What's going through your head? Was he seemingly open to what this woman was saying, or was he acting like he was skeptical about her story?
As I was listening to this other person talk about it, I was just really focused on what she was saying. Because when she started talking, and she started talking about how there was a huge, gigantic gray dog that would walk her fence line at night and harass her other dogs, I started paying really close attention. I can only imagine that me sitting in the back of the truck, I was really wide-eyed, and I think I asked him to turn it up so I could hear it better. I didn't pay much attention to what anybody else was doing because I was just really focused to hear what she was going to say next, because I knew if she says that she has seen this thing stand up, and that is exactly what I saw too. So before I told him, I didn't really pay any attention to what anyone else in the truck was doing.
Yeah, I can't say I'll blame you. I'm sure you had to be floored as you're sitting there listening to this woman recount an encounter that was so similar to the one that you had. That's perfectly expected.
Yeah, it was actually a huge relief to me to know that I'm not the only person that has seen something weird like this.
That's really common. Through all this, when you were living in Searcy like that, did you ever have an incident where one of your dogs, or dogs plural, got killed?
Every so often, a dog would get out of the fence. Most of the time, they would just run around the woods and do whatever they wanted to, and then they would come back. But on a couple of different times, the dog would never come back. And I just don't know what else out there could have killed one of them dogs. Maybe there was other stuff out there that I didn't know about. There's people that say that they've seen like big cat cougars out there before. So maybe that's what got them, but it kind of makes you wonder. I'm just not sure.
It sure does make you wonder. It would seem that these things do have an appetite for dogs given certain circumstances, so that just might be what happened.
With me growing up around German Shepherds, you kind of get a feel for what different expressions that you see on their face, how they act. You kind of get a feel for what they're thinking. From the way this thing was looking at the other dogs, to me it looked like it was a big alpha dog trying to put other dogs in its place. And I think it was really frustrated that it couldn't get our big dog Braun to go under the house. I think it was frustrated that Braun wouldn't cave to it. But it just really seemed like it was a big alpha dog trying to put the other dogs in their place so he could come in the fence and do whatever he wanted to.
You mentioned its skull looked to be about 3 times the size of Braun's skull. If Braun didn't back off to this thing, he must have had some brass.
Oh yeah, he was a really good dog. We've had a lot of really good dogs before, but I'm confident in saying that I'll never see another dog like him again. He was extremely intelligent and really big and muscular for a German Shepherd. It almost looked like somebody had mixed a German Shepherd and a Pit Bull. He had huge shoulders, and he was really dense, and he was super intelligent. He was the smartest dog that I've ever been around. He's very protective. He was a good dog.
Braun sounds like he was a keeper to me.
Oh yeah, he was. He was with all the dogs that we've ever had. With us having that kennel, we've been through hundreds of dogs. That was the only dog that when it died, My dad actually cried when he died, and I'd never seen him cry over a dog before.
I can understand why he did. After that encounter in the pine grove that night, did you have any other incidents with activity?
Not me personally. It wasn't maybe a few months after that happened. And like I said, I didn't really go back outside much after that when I knew that it had found a way to get inside the fence without the dogs being able to get it with it climbing the tree. But after that, I didn't really go back out, and it wasn't a few months later. We actually had a house fire there, and the house completely burned to the ground. It was a total loss. A few months later, we wound up moving up here to northern Arkansas.
Sorry to hear about the house burning down.
Yeah, that was a bummer.
Yeah, I'd say. That's a hard one to get over. Once you moved up north, did you have any incidents happen?
Not any dog man type stuff. There has been some with me and everybody else that lives up here. There's been a lot of Bigfoot type encounters as far as things like throwing rocks at you and making strange noises in the woods. We've even got to see them a couple of times. There's a few of us that have seen them. They've even came so far as to come up to the house and look in the window. But they don't come off as being super dangerous. They seem like they're really big animals and they could be dangerous, but they seem like the only reason that you would ever see them is just because they're very curious as to what people are doing.
You happen to look in the window, that would get your attention.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I'm sure it does. What about the bow hunter who went back into the woods that time? Where did that happen?
Yeah, that was back in Searcy. This was, if my recollection is right, this was a long time ago, and I could have my timelines off here, but there was just some guy on a four-wheeler. I don't know who he was or anything, but I just happened to be up and around at this part of the day. I think it was early morning, and I hear somebody coming down the gravel road, and he's on his four-wheeler. He's kind of taking his time, putting down the trail. He gets onto the four-wheeler trail, and he goes up maybe 40 acres, and then he makes a turn where the field stops and the woods start again. And he cuts across the field that way, and then he cuts off into the woods again. You know, I watched him ride back there for probably 5 minutes. You know, he was covering a lot of ground, but he was taking his time. He was decked out like a typical person you'd expect to see going hunting. He had a really nice crossbow. It had to be like a $500 or $600 crossbow. And he had a little hunting ball cap, and he was all decked out and, you know, the appropriate camouflage for the area. And I remember he was in a good mood, you know, even when he rode by me and him exchanged waves. He took off back there, and I could hear him faintly as he got back into the woods. I could hear the four-wheeler shut off, and I just kind of didn't pay any more attention to him. I just assumed he was just somebody going back there to hunt. Whenever he was done, I'd maybe see him come back out with a deer or something. But I was out in the yard kind of playing around and roughhousing with the dogs, and I hear the four-wheeler start back up again, not 10 minutes after it shut off. And I hear it just, you can tell when somebody's really pushing the throttle on something. It'll have that loud whine to it. He was pushing it way across the field. I see him come out of the wood line, but this time he doesn't go around the field on the trail. He cuts straight through the field. He cuts right across it. As he gets closer, I can start to see the expression on his face. He's constantly looking behind him, like he was expecting a T-Rex to come busting out of the woods chasing him. He was really wide-eyed, and he was looking behind him constantly, and he was really, really letting that four-wheeler go full out. As he's coming back, I noticed his hat's missing. I don't see it anywhere on the four-wheeler, and he doesn't have his crossbow anymore. That was missing too. He just gets back out across the field. He eventually makes it across. He hits the gravel road again, and he was gone. And he was going even faster now that he wasn't being slowed down by the thick dirt of the field. As fast as that thing could go, he was gone, and I never saw him again. He never came back out hunting. And after him, I never saw anybody else go hunting out there again. So it makes you wonder what he saw out there that made him feel like he had to drop everything and leave that urgently.
Whatever it was that he did see, it left an impression on him, that's for sure.
Yeah, he looked like he was freaking out pretty bad.
Yeah, sounds like the word must have gotten out amongst the hunters in that area that that was a bad place to go to.
Evidently.
I'd say so. If you don't mind, let's touch a little more on these incidents that happened at your grandparents' house in Searcy. From what I understand, you said that once your mom knew about your encounters with this strange creature, she told you about some incidents that had happened at her parents' house. Could you go into more detail on what they experienced?
Everything that I know about from this is just secondhand, just from what she has told me that they've told her. Because, like I said, they live, maybe a quarter mile down the road from us. I used to walk down to their house almost every day. They were just right there. My grandpa would say that during certain times of the year, I never heard what time of the year that was, but during certain times of the year, there would be something that would come up in their yard, and it would even beat the side of the house. And they could hear something kind of scratching the side of the house as if it was claws or something. And they would smell like a really nasty odor in the air. But as far as I know, they never actually saw anything, because these things would happen at night. And if I remember right, they did have trouble every so often with something coming up and killing their cats and dogs that they had. Other than that, I haven't got a whole lot of information out of them about that. Just from the way that I thought about it, with me seeing it and not wanting to say anything to anybody, I can only imagine that if someone did see it, they tried to forget it, or that they, didn't want to say anything, just because I couldn't have seen that. Maybe my medication's off or something. I don't know. But I could see why maybe they wouldn't want to say anything if they did see something.
That had to be awfully hard on them to experience things like that. Moving on, Jake, you mentioned the Bigfoot encounters that you had. I might as well go ahead and let the cat out of the bag now. In production right now was another talk radio show that I'm going to be releasing fairly soon called Bigfoot Eyewitness Radio. Would you be interested in being a guest on Bigfoot Eyewitness Radio once I've got it ready to air?
Sure. I could go on a lot longer about that, because pretty much when we moved up here, we live in an area that's way out in the middle of nowhere, just in the middle of the woods. And for probably the past 10 or 12 years, we've all been running into these different things. It's been pretty neat. It's made it interesting to live here.
So that you know, Bigfoot Eyewitness Radio is going to be cut from the same mold as Dogman Encounters. It's going to be a less is more type format. It's going to be straight to the point. If you or any of the family members that you told me about in the pre-interview who have had these encounters would be interested in coming on, the more the merrier. I'd love to have you on.
Oh yeah, I'm pretty sure I could drum up a few people, because just about everybody that's been out here knows that there is something out here. There's been a few of us that have actually got to see them on rare occasions.
You said this is Hardy, Arkansas, where all this is going on.
Yeah, we actually live in Ash Flat. It's 2 towns over from Hardy. One of the places that I work is in Hardy. It's maybe a 25-minute drive from here, so it's pretty close to Hardy, yeah.
In the pre-interview, you mentioned that you've had all of these Bigfoot encounters, and also mentioned the fact that all of your friends know about these Bigfoot encounters you've had. After that, you mentioned that you haven't shared the fact that you've had these Dogman encounters with those same friends. What's the reasoning behind that?
It seems like someone could really seem that it was unlikely that, he sees Bigfoots and now he says that he's seen something else too, but I can't really tell you why. I just never brought it up to any of them. Even the people that's been out here that have been standing next to me and seen one of these things, they know that there's something out here. I've never brought it up to them at all. Too off the wall.
To me, it's not all that surprising. Bigfoot's a lot more readily accepted than Dogman, so I can't say I'll blame you there. The same friends who openly accept the existence of Bigfoot just might laugh at you if you had shared the fact that you had these encounters with Dogman with them, so that does make sense. Well, it's about time to close the show out here, Jake. Do you have any closing comments you'd like to share?
I know a lot of people that like to go out in the woods and they have a really nonchalant attitude, like there's nothing out there that they don't know about or that can't hurt them or something. Or you'll hear people say things even about Bigfoot, well, a Bigfoot's never killed anybody in the woods, so how do you know that? How do you know that there's not a Bigfoot or God knows what else out there that is going to kill you or that hasn't killed somebody before? If you're out in the woods by yourself and something kills you, Nobody's ever going to know what got you. People don't think about that. People don't think that it's really dangerous out there and that they need to be ready and have whatever they need to have with.
Episode 66. Hello, thanks for tuning in to another episode of Dogman Encounters Radio. I'm Vic Cundiff, and I'll be your host as we listen to eyewitness encounters involving one of the most terrifying cryptids, dogmen. Our guest tonight wishes to remain anonymous. For that reason, I'm just going to call him Mike during the show. Mike, welcome to Dogman Encounters Radio. Thanks so much for coming.
Hey, Vic. Nice to be here.
For starters, Mike, could you give us a brief bio on yourself? I know you want to remain anonymous. If you could just keep it kind of vague so that no one can pinpoint who you are.
35 years old. Work in a hospital, in the emergency room. Born and raised in North Alabama. Not too long ago, I just got out of the Navy. Spend most of my time either working and doing yard work or trying to go hunting.
Well, that sounds like a good life to me. And thank you for your service to our country. I appreciate it.
Thank you very much. Appreciate hearing that.
Oh, you're welcome. Mike, what's it like living in an area where you know dogmen are?
Well, it's not really that different from living everywhere else. Pretty much everybody who goes out at night around here tends to wander around in large groups. Other than that, I'm not really too sure the things actually live here. I think they're kind of swinging down every once in a while from another area.
In day-to-day life, when you have so many things to worry about, a lot of us take for granted what it must be like when you have that to worry about also, in addition to everything else.
Yeah, most people don't really believe they're out there. You got to keep your eyes open and keep all your senses sharp to figure out what's going on around you, especially at night around here.
That certainly would complicate things. We've got so many things to talk about here tonight, it's hard to know where to start. The first thing I'm going to throw at you is, your uncles used to talk about 3 different types of woolly boogers, as they called them. Please tell us about that.
Well, the first type was what everybody calls Sasquatch. They just called Bigfoot. The second type is something they called Barefoot, which they believe was almost exactly like Bigfoot, except it had claws on its hands and feet and a bear's head, or close to a bear's head. The third type is what they simply call a werewolf, and what everybody today is calling a dogman. The Sasquatch sometimes would make itself a nuisance by taking pets or cattle or something like that, or sometimes out in the boonies, somebody working on a railroad would get snatched. As far as they told me, they never actually killed them. They would take them out there and have a little fun with them, but they'd turn them loose later on. The bear squatch, what I like to call bear squatch, They said they're a bit more dangerous. Sometimes if somebody leaves their kids unattended, they'll snatch one up. You'd never see them again. And the dogmen, they say most of the time the dogman's not that dangerous, but whenever you get a few of them off by themselves causing mischief, they can become quite terrifying. One of the reasons they didn't like messing with them too much is because they considered them to be too dangerous, too hard to kill to begin with. You had to be able to pin them down somewhere.
I bet good money that the bear squatch that they were talking about were type 3 dogmen. It sure sounds like it from the way you describe them, but without seeing exactly what they were talking about, it's hard to know for sure. You were telling me in the pre-interview that your uncles have been telling you over the years about a bunch of dogman horror stories. Tell us about those.
All right. Well, my uncles used to tell me horror stories about how the dogman liked to make people disappear. Said, sometimes you'll find vehicles abandoned on the side of the road, or sometimes you'll find people with their houses open, the doors open. And they say that a dogman would come up and pretty much check the door to see if it was unlocked at night. If it's unlocked, they would just go straight on in there. Snoop around if somebody was in there, if they didn't have dogs or something in there to alert them to it, or, something like that. The dogman would snatch them. Or a dogman would check the window, see if somebody was locking the window, see if it was open, see if it was just screened. They would try to get their attention for one reason or another. Terrify them, or just go ahead and snatch them right through the window. Usually if they were asleep, my uncle said the dogman would grab them by their leg and just pull them straight on out. One particular scary bit my uncles used to tell me is that sometimes a dogman would take and try to get somebody's attention to come outside. And if you got a large porch or something like that, they'd be standing up on top of the porch, waiting for you to come out. As soon as you come out, they'd snatch you up by the head. And anybody who come along later would find somebody missing, everything in their house just like they had left it, door wide open. The person's just gone. Another thing they told me is that sometimes they would try to run across a road or something like that, scare somebody into either pulling off or skidding off into a ditch or something like that. And then they'd either sit there and wait for the person to get out or come right on up and pull the door open and get them. Bit spooky to be relaying some of those stories around the campfire at night, but that's what they like to do sometimes. My uncles like to give you a little scare every once in a while, telling them about horror stories.
Well, that would certainly do it, hearing stories like that. I don't know if you can hear that right now, Mike, but I'd swear I can hear thousands upon thousands of people checking their door locks right now and closing windows and locking them and all that after hearing that story. And your story is not the first one that's been on the show talking about that sort of thing. In fact, I'm not sure how long it's been, but I heard a story on a Sasquatch show where they were talking about a guy who was found, or I guess his body, I should say, was found in his house. The rest of the house was undisturbed. The guy's body, without its head, was found sitting in his favorite recliner. His head, if I remember correctly, was found out in the front yard. He had a German Shepherd, I think it was, that was, I guess, laying next to the head, if I remember correctly. From what I have gathered over the years, it seems like removing people's heads if they decide to kill someone, that seems to be a preferred method of killing someone for dogmen. When I heard that story, they were kind of pointing to the idea that it was a Sasquatch that might have done that, but when I heard that, I was thinking dogman all the while.
Yeah, my uncles told some of those horror stories about human body parts and stuff like that being found up in the trees and things like that. Dogmen, or what my uncles told me, tended to do something like that as a bit of a frightening reminder as well as a territorial marker. This is mine. I'm here. Don't come here. Get lost. And they seem to think that the dogmen don't usually eat people. They're not actually out to kill and eat somebody. They'll eat a pet, they'll eat animals, they'll eat livestock, but they don't seem to eat people. get a hold of you, they might tend to kill you, or even mutilate you or mangle you. But my uncles didn't believe they ate people.
Well, not much, but I guess at least to a certain degree that's a little comforting knowing that if they do kill you, they don't seem to want to eat you.
Yeah.
I guess that helps a little bit. You said your uncles used to talk about tracking and hunting dogmen also. What did they tell you?
They said it takes a lot of footwork. You got to use your vehicles to go across roads around areas that spans quite a few miles, like an entire county. You got to pretty much go around the entire circumference and check out everything that looks like it might be a footprint trap. You got to look for how many individuals are in the area. You got to look for what type, because, something might be going on. It might not actually be a dog man. They say sometimes there's either a rogue male or sometimes even a rogue female that go off on their own. They're not in a pack. They said if it's a pack, they always use poison. If it's not a pack, they tend to try to figure out and go after it one-on-one.
These boars are as stubborn as my
Sometimes it could be a younger individual that's just being curious.
Harvest one more and I bet
a
they'll turn tail.
Coming around somebody's house, trying to check everything else out. And they say that can turn into a real problem. But they say you got to do a lot of footwork, checking out tracks. Unlike Sasquatch, they don't really follow the scrub food. They don't really follow berries that are starting to come into season, or fruiting trees, or acorns, or anything like that. They tend to follow the game. So you got to keep your eye on who's got pets, whether the pets are out, whether they're small pets, big pets. You got to keep your eye on who's got goats, who's got sheep, who's got cattle, where they're located around the county. Sometimes you got to get out and you got to walk around these places. You got to walk around somebody's ranch or something like that without being too obtrusive to it. Can't disturb his cattle or his herds or anything like that. But you got to sometimes ask permission to go in and have a look at the ponds he's got inside of his property, to water his animals, see if there's any kind of footprints that aren't hooves. Got to do a lot of legwork, but they always told me.
These things seem to be dangerous enough on their own without knowing that they're being hunted. I can only imagine how much more dangerous knowing that they are being hunted would make them.
Yeah, they say that's one of the reasons they didn't like to mess with them too much. Anything like that, they said, tends to be smart. If they get where they know you're after them, then you pretty much got to quit.
It sounds like they've got a lot of experience hunting them. I can only imagine some of the trips that they've been out on and how hairy they got. We've got 3 encounters to talk about tonight. Let's talk about the first one you had in '89.
Alright. Well, me, my grandmother, 4 of my cousins, and my uncles. Every summer we go off camping and fishing. My uncles like to run trout lines on a creek called Flint River. It's called Flint River, but it's really just a glorified creek, a fairly large creek. It runs through a place called Paint Rock Valley. They like to go down there, set up trout line and along Flint River. And pretty much throughout the night, every hour or so, they'd go out in the boat and check their trout line. Well, one summer down there, my grandmother was with us, and she heard something off in the distance that sounded like a baby crying. She turned white as a sheet, and she grabbed everything we had with us camping that would burn. Paper plates, plastic spoons and forks, solo cups, everything. She had that fire raging. She sent us and herself out. We gathered everything else that would burn, every leaf, every twig, every stick that we could use to make a fire. Pretty much dragged everything back as far as the light could reach. And she got that fire raging. To me at the time, it was well over head high. It looked to me like it was going all the way up into the treetops. And she pulled the truck with the wagon right on up there close to the fire, as close as she could get it without worrying about the truck. And everybody piled into the truck. and she sat there with a double-barrel shotgun. And directly we heard something coming closer and closer, and it never did come into the firelight. It stayed out far enough just to be nothing more than a shadow amongst the trees. But she kept her eyes on it. She never let her eyes go off of it. It looked to me like she didn't even blink. And it was making noises like low growl and stuff like that. And we heard snapping and popping, kind of like wet joint popping sounds out there. And it seemed to shift one side to another, like it was stretching out. And then it stood up. When it stood up, my grandmother lowered that window a crack. She let it have it, that double-barrel shotgun. And that thing was loud inside that truck. It seemed like it was going to make all of us go deaf. But the thing fell over and it commenced to screaming. Then it jumped right back up, took off. We didn't see it again that night. When my uncles came back, she gave all of them a pretty good cussing. They loaded everything else up and left.
Did your uncles ever give you an idea how far or how close they were when all this action happened?
No, and I never did really ask them. I have to think they were pretty far off. They said they heard the gunshot, but they didn't hear anything else.
Yeah, they could have been pretty far off still and heard that shot. It is pretty hard to tell. Well, we've got a lot to cover, so if you don't mind, let's just hop right into this second encounter you had.
Alright. Well, the second encounter happened in '92. I was 12 years old at the time. I don't remember exactly where it was. I only remember it was in the southeast Tennessee region. The area was full of low-lying hills, pastures, and fields, separated by woods, forest with a few creeks, and a bunch of cow pastures had ponds and stuff in them. And there was a ranch-style farmhouse up there. My three eldest uncles took me on up there with their dogs. They had three big old dogs. They were mixed bred between a coonhound and a mastiff. And my youngest of my elder uncles was the one that tended to be in charge of breeding the dogs. Well, three big old male dogs they keep up there with us. And we went inside this ranch house. And it looked like people were still living in the ranch house. They had just kind of vacated the area. I don't know if they did that because they had a deal with my uncles to come in there, try to clear something out that was messing with their cattle or what. But we went in there and they were gone, and my uncles unloaded the truck and took the dogs and took a tiller and a bunch of huge traps, like bear traps, and some shovels, and some of those spiral stake spikes that you twist into the ground for dogs. When this all started, I kind of thought they were just going to take the dogs out. They didn't do it, though. They just brought the dogs right on inside the house. And every time when they'd go outside, they'd take the dogs with them. And they'd kind of spread the dogs out. Two of them would go off and hold the dogs, and one of them would be working. And they'd plow the ground up underneath the windows. And a pretty huge arc going out around those windows. You know, all the ground underneath the windows. And then when they got them plowed up, they commenced the digging. They kind of scraped off the ground that they had plowed, and then they would dig into the solid ground underneath that, about 2.5 feet. And they'd twist these twist spikes in that ground. And kind of hard to twist them in there. I remember them having to use sticks to stick into that loop on top of the spike and twist it to get a better grip. It was kind of hard clay. And they attached a length of logging chain onto the spike. They attached that to that bear trap thing, and then they'd fill it back in, and they'd set the bear trap down on top of the ground, right about the level of where it's hard. And then they'd put that plowed earth back up on top of it, nice and gentle, so you can't see it, and the whole thing looked normal. And they'd plant some sort of little bush or something around it. I think it was just some sort of ornamental thing that they picked up to make it look like they had just plowed it up, turned it into like a little manicured thing to plant something in next to the house. Anyway, between those plants, they would always stick a bear trap. And they'd put a bear trap right there, directly underneath the window. And they'd do the same thing to all those bear traps. They would be attached to spikes that are twisted down into that hard clay, into that hard ground, and buried just underneath the ground to where you can't see them. They never did stake the dogs out. Every time the dogs would start acting up, they'd quit work, and they'd bring the dogs inside, and they'd come inside too. And every time they did that, they'd always stick me in the bathroom. This house had a bathroom towards the middle of it, and they had the window blocked off. Tiny little window up towards the top of the wall in the bathroom. They kept it blocked off with a trash bag and duct tape. Make sure nothing could see in. Then every time the dogs would stop growling or something at the wall, then they'd go back outside with the dogs, look around the house, make sure the dogs didn't act up. If the dogs acted up again, they'd bring them inside. If the dogs didn't act up, they would go ahead and continue working until they got all the windows done up the way they wanted them. Then they'd come inside with the dogs, and they'd only go outside with the dogs, let the dogs use the bathroom, and then right back inside the house. Well, one night, or rather I should say early morning, because I remember it was just starting to get light over towards the horizon. We heard the awfulest screaming and yelling on the side of the house right about where a window was. And something thrashing up against the house, and the dogs were... Before this, the dogs had already started growling like they was falling on the wall. But the dogs didn't bark. They didn't bark unless they got something up a damn tree. But, we heard that awful screaming and squalling sound outside. It sounded like whatever was real high-pitched, like shattered glass high-pitched. I always think back to it, think it's a wonder that the windows never did bust out. But they didn't take the dogs out with them this time. This time they went outside with pump shotguns, several loads, reloads, and I heard them just a-blasting away. It sounded like they were going 2 shotguns at a time. Then another one would take over while they reloaded. And they just kept blasting away. To me, it felt like this went on for like 10 minutes. And then it stopped. Screaming stopped like halfway through. But after they stopped shooting, they brought me on out there. It was getting a bit more light. And they made sure to show me what they had killed out there. It was one of these dog men. They always seemed to believe that to make something feel more real so you weren't too afraid of it, you had to see it dead. That's what they did. They showed it to me, and they let me go up there and touch it and examine it. Let me pull its lips back, get a real good close look at its teeth, its claws. I like to say what's on its hands, but it looked kind of like somebody had taken a dog or a wolf's paw and blowed it up to huge proportions and then stretched all the toes out to become fingers. And it actually had 5 fingers, which is something you wouldn't expect from something that blowed up from a dog's paw. But it had the rough, what looked like chapped skin. You know, the broken type pattern that you see on the pads of a dog. You ever take your dog's foot up and look at it? It doesn't really have fingerprints. It's got a kind of a broken pattern to the skin. Its fingers and the pads of its hands kind of looked like that. And it had these long fingernails that were real thick and strong, like pointed like claws. And they were like, God, they must have been like an inch or so long, maybe longer, coming out of the fingers. And they were retractable. I remember that. I remember going up there and looking at them and thinking they were like a cat. They were retractable. They kind of moved a little bit, not all the way, but a little bit inside and outside of the finger, the way a cat does. When I saw this, I kind of asked my uncles if this thing was some sort of cat. They told me, nope. Look at the head, boy. Does that look like a cat's head to you? Got up there and did a real close look at the head, and it looked like a giant freaking dog. Just looked like somebody had taken a huge dog's head, stuck it there. They didn't shoot the head. They seemed to be concentrating on the body and the legs and the big parts of the arms. And they pretty much made this thing's body look like hamburger. There were a few dimes scattered about. This thing's teeth, I got a real good close look at its teeth, felt of its mouth, lips. Its lips were like a dog's. They kind of, a dog's got these lips that are, able to go up and down a little bit higher than a human. They were like that. But its teeth weren't like a dog's. It had canine's teeth the way a dog did, but the teeth weren't like a dog. The dog's teeth kind of are rounded. They're softer edged. They're not as sharp. Dog's teeth don't really have real hard, sharp points on them. But these things did. Both the uppers and the lowers had sharp points. It looked kind of like they were self-sharpening against themselves or something. The ears had little spikes or tufts of fur coming out of the top of them, and they were pointed. But they weren't pointed exactly the way a German Shepherd's were. They were kind of curved a little bit inward from the top. And the eyes were an amber colored. It looked kind of like somebody had shined a light through a glass of beer. The way the beer kind of lights up a little bit. It's got that kind of amber color to it. The claws on the feet look just like really huge dog paws. But the claws didn't seem to be retractable on the feet. And I don't know if it's just because of death or what, but two of the toes seem to be curled upward. I don't know if anybody's like this, but they ever try to stretch out their toes when they got bare feet. How two of the toes sometimes seem to curl upwards a little bit better than the other three. That's the way this thing's feet did. My uncle made sure I got a real good close look at this thing. Felt of it. When I finished examining it, they brought out machetes. And they went to hacking it apart. Cut its arms, its legs, its head, chopped its body up. They kind of strolled the body out through the woods, across the fields, things like that, and they left him there. When I asked them about that, they said they needed to do that to make sure other ones didn't come into the area. After that, we left. I never really went back to that spot, or I'm not even sure I'd be able to find that house again. Like I said, I was 12 years old. I didn't know exactly where it was. I wasn't keeping track of road signs or anything like that. All I knew it was in somewhere in southeast Tennessee.
If you had to give a general description of what this dog man looked like laying there on the ground, how would you describe it?
Well, a lot of your guests said they looked like the ones from the underworld, the ones that looked more wolfish-like than the ones in the original movie. And I remember listening to this one show, this hunter, who says the one he saw looked like the werewolf from Van Helsing. That's what I saw when I saw it dead. It looked exactly like the black werewolf that Hugh Jackman, who always played Wolverine. It looked exactly like that when it was dead, except it had a tail. And I'm pretty sure it had even sharper teeth. The teeth looked like they were self-sharpening, like they come to a point.
Well, that's scary. After having the chance to go up and examine this thing when it was dead the way you did that make things better for you later on down the road when you heard these things outside or close to where you were, or did it make it worse?
It seemed to make it better because I knew they were something out there. They were not a supernatural creature. Whatever they were real. It made it better and worse, you could say. My uncles always believed that a supernatural creature wouldn't be able to come into your house after you. They'd be stuck by the threshold. They always believed anywhere you lived or slept or rested or spent most of your time, a supernatural creature couldn't get in there unless they were invited. But they always believed that a bear squatch, a Sasquatch, or a dog man weren't supernatural, and they could actually break into your house if they wanted to. other than that one I saw the shadow of during this summer, I've never actually heard any of them out here. Heard a bunch of coyotes, but never any dogmen. Nothing that sounded like that. Well, my mother seemed to think she heard something out in the woods. It sounded like, she's kind of confused as to whether it was a woman or a child. She just said she heard some kind of weird noise going on out there around the back towards where the woods were. There's an area where I live in North Alabama. You've got lots of fields and cow pastures, but they're all divided by woods with a whole lot of scattered houses and neighborhoods and trailers and stuff in between them. I kind of get the feeling that whatever this particular thing is, whether it's a dogman or what, seems to be swinging down from Tennessee about every year or every few years or so. And it seems to follow in between these pastures and fields and stuff along these wood lines. Because I got a wood line running right beside my house. And that's about where she keeps hearing it, and that's where I saw this thing walking across that field and across the road right there, going following the wood line.
You mentioned that incident when you looked out and saw that shadow. Let's talk about that third encounter you had.
Alright. I was getting ready to go to work. I work up at the hospital in Huntsville City. And I worked the third shift in the ER. And it was 8:30 when I was getting ready to go to work. I like to get going a bit early, about an hour and a half or so early. I like to stop, give me something to eat, take my time, everything else. Well, it's about 8:30. That's when I like to get started. It was during the summer. And I saw something that I thought was a cow, a fairly large calf. It didn't look quite like a full-grown cow. It kind of looked like a juvenile, you know. And it was walking along the wood line because the guy in front of me owns a pasture. He's got his pasture out there, and his pasture is part field and part wooded area. And this thing was walking right there on the border between the woods and the pasture. And like I said, at first I thought it was a small cow, a calf or something. As I got to watching it, it seemed to be slinking, like what you'd imagine a tiger or a lion or some sort of big cat would look like when it's moving. You know, and a slinky spine that's kind of just taking its time, leisurely walking along. And then it got to the fence row, this barbed wire fence. And it did something peculiar. It stood up, and it stepped over the fence, and it stepped over the ditch. It's a fairly steep ditch, but it's not that big. I, as a grown man, can pretty much hop all the way across it. And it stepped across that fence. Then it went onto all fours again and went right across the road and off into that wooded area right there beside my house. I just calmly stepped back around the truck, went back inside the house, told my mother inside the house not to let the dogs out, because we both got trailers right there on that same lot. And she's got a little Chihuahua and a large dog that's a mixed breed between a wolf miniature chow and a husky. I told her to keep the dogs in tonight, that I saw something go across the road. She didn't make nothing of it, so I went back outside, climbed in my truck, and I went to work. There ain't been no incidences in the area of pets going missing, or at least not that many. Every once in a while, every few months or so, you'll see some billboard or poster or something like that going up at one of these convenience stores or at Grinders down there about a pet going missing or something like that. But not that often, not a whole bunch of them. It's not like crowded like you would expect it to be if one of these things was in the area where my uncles taught me. That's what gives me the feeling that they're just kind of swinging through. I went on to work, and I didn't think much anything else of it. It wasn't until a few months later that my mom told me that she's been hearing something out around the pond. Every time I've gone out there around the pond to investigate, I haven't seen anything or heard anything that she seemed to be talking about. Since I work at night, that's That's when she said it was happening. I didn't really get any first-hand experience on that. Didn't find any footprints or anything like that. There's a few areas that I saw trails where something's come through. And dug up in the ground and things like that, but nothing more. That's pretty much the end of that. And she said she ain't been hearing that noise out there lately. But whatever it is, I guess it moved on.
Whatever it is, I sure hope it has moved on. In the pre-interview, you were telling me about the dead cow that you smelled, I think, about a year ago or so. Is that the general area where you found that dead cow?
It was right out there in the cow pasture, pretty much right there on the trail that I saw that thing walking on. It was in 2013. It wasn't just me, it was my mom, my aunts, my uncles, and pretty much a bunch of us family members live up and down this road out in this area called New Market, North Alabama. And pretty much this road here is only about a mile long, and everybody up and down this road can smell that dead cow. I don't know how in the world this cow could be dead out there like that with the owner of that cow pasture not smelling it himself, because he just lives right across that cow pasture. Anyway, all of us could smell that dead cow out there, and I kind of got tired of smelling that stinking thing, so I went out there hunting for it. And like I said, I found it right there along the path that thing took. This cow's tongue, its anus, its genitals had been eaten out or cut out, but like they had been surgically removed with a knife. Except it had these scratch marks along its rump around the backside of it, and it was a fairly large cow. It was the genitals of it was mutilated enough to where I couldn't really tell if it was a bull or not, but it was fairly large. It was partially rotted and decayed. Anyway, at first, when I was going up there looking for it, I was thinking a huge pack of coyotes or something had gotten up there and killed something. Because we got coyotes real bad around here nowadays. Back in the 80s and early 90s, before this place got built up the way it is, we had people that would hunt around here, and they would pretty much kill the coyotes off and keep them trimmed back. Some of them would actually trap them and try to sell the fur. But I went ahead and walked across the rest of the way on up across that field, and I told that dude about his dead cow up there, and everybody was getting kind of pissed off that he ain't back there and buried it. He seemed to not want to go back there at first, but that day he kind of took his front end loader out there and he buried the thing. So, but thinking back on it, after seeing that thing walk across that field and across that road, I was thinking, I bet that didn't seem to me like a coyote had killed anything. When they kill something like that, they tend to do a lot more than just take out the tongue and the genitals and the anus and all the soft, chewy bits. They seem to just kind of try to pull the skin across something and just eat as much as they could.
Yeah, that doesn't sound like a coyote kill to me either. You mentioned all the neighbors up and down the road there for about a mile or so. Do you know if any of them are seeing these things, or is it just you and your family that are seeing dogmen?
I haven't really asked around. I know we're not the only ones with a pond. There's a guy who lives behind us on a different road. He's got a pond that's right there close to the forest line too, the wood line. And there's a dude about halfway down the road who's got a pond out in the field. Some of the retired people seem to be out there. Now that you mention it, I might go by here one of these days and ask them if they notice any strange noises out in the wood line and in the forest and stuff like that. The guy who lives way down on the end of the road said that he's been having problems with coyotes, getting a little bit too brave. He said he was out mowing his lawn and a really large pack of, like, I don't know if he said it was 5 or 10 coyotes, but he said it was just a large pack. It was out there growling at him. He said he's never seen coyotes do that before. When he walked up to them a little bit closer with a flashlight, they all took off. That's pretty much the last my neighbor way down at the end of the road, about a mile down there, had to say about it. I never asked him if he heard any strange noises out there at night or anything like that.
I'd be kind of surprised if they weren't having activity too, since you're seeing so much, or since you have seen so much in the past. But unless they come out and tell you about it, of course we'll never know for sure. You shared an interesting tidbit of information with me about Missing 411. Tell us about that.
Oh, yeah. I was reading a novel one day, and the author kind of put it in his book that the number of people who go missing, who just kind of disappear each year, is about the same percent as the number of herd animals on the Serengeti that get taken by large predators, like lions or hyenas or something like that. I remember reading that, and I was thinking it's interesting, and I went back and checked on it. It turns out to be relatively true. I'm not saying all these people are, being taken by some type of large predator, but it's just something interesting. I wish somebody with a little bit more background on research would kind of look into about how many vehicles are left abandoned on the side of the road, about how many homes are left abandoned, just somebody seems to just walk off and leave it like they'd never been there before. Like they just kind of, decided one day to get up and leave, just never come back.
It sure does make you wonder what's behind all of that. Have your uncles shared any opinions with you about whether it's dogmen that are mostly responsible for these people being taken, or Sasquatch, or even the Bear Squatch?
My uncle seems to think it was a combination of a bunch of things. You gotta remember, my uncles were pretty old school. I'm not saying I believe in this. I'd have to see it for myself to believe it. But my uncles believed that what we today call a dogman was an actual, real werewolf. Anytime I ask them about this, they always cite that Native Americans had their own myths and legends about shapeshifters, but they never actually had any myths and legends about werewolves until after the white man started showing up from Europe. And they always said that if you follow these things, they seem to start somewhere around Louisiana, then they move outwards from there, going all over the place. My uncles seem to think they actually recruited people. They would either a lone female or a male or somebody like that had, for one reason or another, had lost a mate or lost a family member or a group had lost somebody, that they would actually recruit a new member. They always seem to believe that sometimes these disappearances were people that had been tricked into going out after them. They always seem to think they'd make a crying noise like a baby to try and see if there was a man out there with a fraternal instinct to go out there and try to protect the baby, or they'd make a crying noise like a woman screaming bloody murder, see if there was a man in there with an instinct to go out there and try to save the woman. And that's the type they would want. Somebody that would, be family-oriented. So they'd try to make them a part of the pack, or try to get them as a mate. They said they'd always give a compulsion. I didn't understand what that was at the time, but they say it was a compulsion to go along with it, to try and get somebody to go out there. It'd be almost like it was irrational fear for one of their own children, or crazy, almost, not quite, but almost a drive to go out there and save a woman. And somebody, if they went all the way out there to wherever they heard that noise, that'd be it, and they'd be gotten. They'd take them. They didn't believe that it was a bite or a scratch that would cause somebody to be turned into one of these things. They always believed that it was a sexual thing. They believed they'd get out there and they'd be assaulted, they'd be attacked and raped. And they would kind of hang on to them out there and keep them out there, and after a while they would not come back. You just never see them again. That's a scary thought. That's what my uncles believed. I don't really hold much water with it. I kind of have to see it or something like that firsthand to know about it. When I was little, I didn't feel any compulsion when I heard this thing crying out in the woods, so, nothing like that. that's just what they believed. That's old folky beliefs.
It sure doesn't paint a pretty picture.
No, it doesn't.
Not at all. You just shared with us where they seem to think these things come from or came from. As far as your beliefs, where do you think they came from?
I'm not really sure. After they told me that, I went in school and I started trying to do some research on a lot of the stuff they told me. I was still in high school and they were still teaching me these things before my elder uncles started dying off. The Sasquatch, the only thing I can find in my research that seems to point to that would be a Gigantopithecus. Comes from Southeast Asia. Paleontologists seem to think that the Gigantopithecus was descended from or related to the orangutan. Also in the paleontology record, in some of the books, there's a mention of a bear-like creature that lived in forests. It was pretty much arboreal, meaning it lived almost exclusively in trees, the way an orangutan does today. I kind of got the theory that the bear squatch is probably a parallel evolution version of the Gigantopithecus, only descended from that tree-dwelling bear animal instead of an orangutan. As for dogmen, other than myths and legends, I really don't have any idea where those things came from. I can't find anything in the fossil record or paleontology that seems to correlate with them at all. The first myths I've been able to trace back go to Egypt and ancient Greece. That's as far back as I've been able to get. Other than that, every culture seems to have something about shapeshifters. All of them got something about shapeshifters either being vicious and mean and attacking and killing and eating people, or actually trying to seduce them or lure them out somewhere and rape them. That seems to be the big thing about shapeshifters and mythology and legend. That's all I've been able to ever dig up on the things, to tell you the truth. But like I said, I've found nothing in any of the books I've ever researched on animals and zoology or paleontology or anything like that that points to anything like this.
Yeah, the lack of evidence like that is one of the most frustrating parts. We know they're out there, but there's just really nothing pointing towards where they did come from, so that's just another big mystery about them.
Yep. My uncles seem to think that they lived in groups like packs, but they tended to be family-oriented, usually with a really big male. And they seem to think most of them weren't dangerous, that they just kind of mind their own business and go off on their own. They seem to think they were just scary as all. Said every once in a while, it's when you get a rogue or a group that are going out. He said every once in a while you get what they like to call a juvenile pack or something like that that's going off and trying to get themselves established, or some reason like that. You get a bunch of strays or loners that start banding together and form a group. They start wandering around looking for a territory or something like that, and they said they tend to get dangerous. They're curious, they're nosy. You got to remember, my uncles were people that actually believed that these things weren't like that all the time. They changed form into people, which I always thought was a bit of a scary thought, that they were actually real and actual werewolves. One of the ways they always told me to track them was to look for entire sets of clothes, rather cheap clothes at that were set on a rock, underneath a bush, or on top of a bush up off the ground, or on a low-hanging limb up off the ground, or something like that out in the woods. Usually set by some place that's either a four-wheeler trail or a four-wheel drive trail that seemed to go off the main road or a country road off into the woods. And usually dead ends there at a creek or something like that, set up so that you literally got to drive your truck or your four-wheeler through a spot where you can't see inside. The bush, the brush is right there that thick going into it. All you can see is pretty much the track that's worn out in the dirt. Once you get in there, you pretty much got to stop. My uncles always taught me to go into places like that and you look around for clothes. They always got their clothes set up off the ground somewhere. They always said they seemed to be cheap clothes like you find at a thrift store or something like that.
As if dogmen aren't bad enough, if there really were werewolves around, I guess that's the only way this whole thing could be worse.
Yeah, they seem to think that they were the same thing. They seem to think that when they went out there in a group, they always went out there together. And when you saw a loner out there, that was the most dangerous ones you could find. They seemed to think because the groups didn't want them for some reason, or because they were just off somewhere looking to build their own group. They always believed they were the most dangerous because they were most likely to snatch people, either to help found their own group or for whatever reason.
Yeah, the idea of a dogman that can't get along with the rest of the group, that's not the type of dogman I want to run into. In the pre-interview, you were talking about the cave systems around Huntsville City, Alabama. You were telling me something interesting about them. What was that?
Oh yeah, the cave systems around Huntsville City, Madison County, New Market, all of them. This whole area is pretty much underridden by caves everywhere. The thing is, they're all closed off. When people came in here and started building the place up, the first thing they did as soon as they started moving in was sealing off caves. Every time they'd find a cave, they'd seal it off. They'd pull rubble into it. Sometimes they'd even pour concrete into them. Sometimes they'd dynamite them and cave them in. But they'd always seal these caves up. And in this area, it's totally ridden with caves everywhere. In fact, so many caves underneath Huntsville City itself that there is a constraint on the types and sizes of buildings that can go up. There's a limit to how big and tall, how heavy a building can be constructed. Big Spring Park, right there in the heart of Huntsville City, there's a little spring with a tiny waterfall coming out of it. If you go up there now, it's bricked up. You can't see or get in there, concreted and bricked up, but if you look through the records, you'll find out that Jesse James had come through there and was running from the law, and they were getting close to catching him, and he ducked down inside Big Spring and actually dove down under, at the time, what was an underwater cave, and escaped into that cave system. Police officers were diving down underneath there and going inside that cave system hunting for him, and they never did find him. They never did find the money he placed under there and stole either, but when they came out, they found out later that he had come up and gone out somewhere else. But they went ahead and they sealed that cave up and pretty much left nothing but the place for the water to come out. Turned it into kind of a small waterfall now. But I'm not even sure they left any caves open up there on Monsanto Mountain where they got the park.
Didn't you say those cave systems continue on, I think, even into other states?
Oh yeah, those cave systems go all the way up into Tennessee, and who knows how much farther from there. When I say it's this entire area, I mean all of North Alabama is pretty much ridden with those caves. When I say they go Huntsville City, New Market, all the way around Madison and up into Tennessee. And that's just the ones that people knew about. Those cave systems were pretty largely unexplored.
Do you think dogmen use caves like that to live in?
I don't know. My uncles didn't seem to think so. Like I said, they seemed to think that they turned into people. They seemed to think that when they bedded down outside in the brush, they always bedded down in some sort of small hidey hole, like a huge brush pile or hollow logs, really huge falling down hollow logs or collections of logs or a burrow into the ground or something like that. They didn't seem to think that they used caves, and they didn't seem to think that they stayed out there all the time, so I don't really know much about that. Me personally, I've never actually gone out hunting for these things, to tell you the truth. I will say something, though, that I didn't mention in the pre-interview. This place up here called Hunt Creek, it runs through New Market, pretty much bordering on Hazel Green. I took my dogs down there one time just to let them get out and run around. And I actually did find a whole set of clothes up on a low-hanging bush.
Oh.
It looked like they were sweatpants and a t-shirt. No socks, no underwear, nothing like that. They had a hat, too. Looked like somebody had just taken them off, and laid them right there up on a low-hanging bush, just as pretty as you please. I remember looking at that, and I was thinking about it, thinking about what my uncles told me, and I was like, nah, couldn't be. And I remember taking my dogs, wandering, when they didn't act up or nothing like that. If this was what my uncle was always saying it would be, they weren't in the area. They had like done their thing there, set their clothes up and taken off. But I was walking up and down the area, and I remember noticing a bunch of deer bones right there beside the road.
I know when you saw those clothes, your heart had to jump.
Yeah, I didn't have my cell phone with me, so I didn't take any pictures of it, but I came back a few days later. When I came back a few days later, the clothes were gone. I did manage to take pictures of the deer bones that were in that space. Right there where the brush was thickest, going from the road, you know, the transition from an open space to into the woods, so it's hard to see in because the brush is real thick there. Right there is where I found the deer bones, and they was just kind of scattered on a footpath right there, going off into the woods. I took pictures of the deer bones, but I didn't find the clothes again. The clothes were gone.
I've got one more question for you before we get out of here. You mentioned in the pre-interview that your uncles told you about bounties that used to be put out for Sasquatch. Do you know of any bounties that were put out for dogmen?
No. I know of plenty of wolf bounties that were put out around Tennessee and even around this area. And coyote bounties, things like that, where ranchers have been having their cattle killed or mutilated or something like that. Usually the bounties in these stores don't actually say what it is. They just say bounty on a beast or bounty on animal or bounty on so-and-so killing property, killing cattle or livestock or pets or something like that. They never actually get specific in these areas. They just say what the bounty is. And they give a number and a name of who you contact for it. Usually it's some big wig rancher or somebody like that, or somebody that's got quite a bit of money, or old school money living off of one of these areas. You know, big money for this area. My uncle seemed to disappear for like several days at a time, and they'd come back and they'd have money with them, anywhere from a few $100s to a few $1,000s.
Well, from what you're sharing with us about what they did around the windows of that farmhouse, sure seems like they did know what they were doing, so I'm not all that surprised.
Yeah. Seeing that thing up close really put it into perspective, whereas before when I was a little kid, I hate to say it, but I was so scared looking out that truck window that I felt like I almost peed myself. And I didn't sleep that night, that day. Pretty much I stayed awake until I was ready to keel over, even when I got back into the city.
Oh, I don't think anyone could blame you. Most people would have handled it that way, so no harm, no foul there.
After that pre-interview, I listened to a few of your shows, and I noticed people seem to sometimes talk about a smell. I didn't smell anything. I didn't even really smell all that much from the dead one, except for it smelling like a dead animal. I mean, its fur was shaggy, kind of like a chow's fur, but it didn't really smell that much worse than a dead dog, to tell you the truth.
Well, on that, I wouldn't be all that surprised if that wasn't the same thing as with Sasquatch. I think with Sasquatch, that's a smell that they can exude at will. They don't smell that way all the time. If you think about it, if either a dogman or a Sasquatch smelled that bad all the time, there's no way they'd be able to sneak up on prey. So it would only make sense that that's an on-demand type system.
Yeah, I guess that would make sense. Might be why in the South some people call Sasquatch skunk ape.
Well, do you have any closing comments you'd like to share, Mike?
I guess it'd be that recent years, these things seem to be getting a lot more populous. I wish somebody would start keeping track of a lot of these sightings.